Lots more opportunity to sing before we are finished today. But, you know, I think that I know something about life right now, okay? And I know this about life, that before a mess, life is great. After a mess, might not be great, but at least you know how the mess has worked out. You've learned some things, you've understood some things. But the most difficult part of life is not before or after, it's in the middle. And the middle of the mess is where most of our confusion comes, it's where most of our angst comes, and it's where most of our pain comes as human beings. And whether you are a Jesus follower or not, I'm talking to people where whatever your faith dynamic is, when you're in the middle of something which is a mess, whether it's your mess that you created, you knew it, it was your fault, whether it's somebody else's mess and they've dragged you into it, so now it's your mess, or whether it's just a mess of life, you know as a human being that the most difficult season of a mess is when you're in the middle of the mess, because you don't know how it's going to work out. You don't know what the end story is. You don't have that gift of hindsight because you're right in the middle. And the question that we're going to look at today is, how do we find peace in the middle of a mess? And a couple of weeks ago, we also looked at the fact that we can make our mess messier by the decisions that we make. And one of our guys found this little very short video on Facebook, and it's funny, all right? I'm sure, I actually know this guy is not harmed in the process, okay? But just take a little look at this guy.
Don't go that way.
The thing is, the guy says, just be careful, and he doesn't. And when you're in the middle of a mess, even right there in that moment, and you've done that, you've stepped in something, and then you can do something else, which makes the mess messier, because you're in the middle, and you're trying to figure it all out. And what I want to do today is I want to look at it in the macro and the micro, okay, and I'll explain what that means in a minute. And I'm going to open up, how do we find peace in the middle? And then I am going to invite every one of us to experience the peace of God in the middle of our mess. But I want to look at it from a macro perspective. And when I say macro, I'm not talking about the cash and carry place that's down the road, all right? I'm talking about the big picture. You see, the reality is that we are living in a time of unprecedented, almost, and I know we've used that word a lot in the last few years, history. Historians, sociologists, futurists believe that the season that we're living in now, I don't mean 2023, I mean this last maybe 15, 20 years, is history will look back and will say this was the moment when there was a massive shift in our world. We're moving from one era to another era, okay? Pope Francis put it this way: we are not living in an era of change, and there's a lot of change, but a change of era. And I've been reading a lot around this at the moment, and I'm fascinated by all this. And it's almost like we're coming out of one era into another era. And let me just give you a little example. The Roman Empire fell and the Dark Ages began. The Roman Empire did not fall on a Wednesday, and the Dark Ages begin on a Thursday. The agricultural era didn't end on a Monday, and the industrial era began on a Tuesday. There was a period in between where you were in between two eras. Historians believe, futurists believe, sociologists believe that we are living in one of those massive shifts of era. So at a macro level, there is an anxiety that we'll talk about, because it looks like this. It looks like the passing era, the coming era, but we're living in what's often been referred to as the gray zone. We're living in between. We're living between the kind of modern view and this globalized, interconnected, network view of the world. All right, I know I'm using a lot of big words there, but I want to stretch you a little bit today as well. And we're living in the gray zone. And the gray zone is characterized by a few things. It's characterized by a lot of conflict. Not just the kind of conflict we see in Ukraine. And of course, we're praying about that. We're coming up to a year of that invasion into Ukraine. Not just that, but there's so much conflict in our world, isn't there? Look on social media, some people that I really deeply, deeply respect right now are being mullered and trolled and abused online globally. And it's a horrible world in which we live in so many ways. There's